Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. On this week's Visitors Edition, we will be joined by Army radio play-by-play voice Rich DeMarco, who is also the Associate Athletic Director at the Academy. Before Rich joins us, let's get it started as we always do, with my view from Section 17. In the opener against Middle Tennessee State, I didn't know what to expect. I have to say that as I watched the game, I swung back and forth. I liked the aggressiveness and attacking style of the offense, but the ball handling snafus, the drop passes, the inability to smash it home in the red zone late in the second half on that goal line stand, those things kind of irritated me. I can't say I was unhappy with how the defense did. I mean, we gave up 2 short field touchdowns, but we were aggressive, fast, and yes, the highlight for me was seeing Ambry Thomas back in action and playing so very well. So overall, I feel really good about the defense. And actually, after watching the game again on Sunday, I came to the conclusion we played much better than I had expected. We just have to clean some things up, and good things will happen for us, I do believe, on both sides of the ball. Every week, though, brings a new challenge, and this week's is very unique. Army comes in with their triple option attack and one of the longest winning streaks in the country. Michigan has the better athletes, no question, but Army will come in here with a well-conditioned, disciplined, mentally tough team. It's a contrast in style, to say the least. Army will try and pound the ball and eat up clock. Michigan will continue to roll out our spread offense and get all of our speed in space. Coaches have long said that the greatest improvement in any season is between weeks 1 and 2. Both Michigan and Army won last week. Both had opening day issues, but they've had a week to clean things up, and both teams will be improved this Saturday. My guest today is the Associate Athletic Director at Army and their radio play-by-play voice. Rich DeMarco joins us next, here on the Michigan Man, in partnership with our friends at SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Here with us on our visitors segment this week is Army radio play-by-play voice Rich DeMarco. Rich, great to have you with us.
No, thanks for having me. Really, I'm looking forward to this game on Saturday.
Well, I think it's going to be fun, always is, when we have one of the service academies in. And I was thinking this week, I was actually alive the last time Michigan and Army played back in '62 here in Ann Arbor. A wee bit too young to remember what was a 17-7 Michigan win. And I think a lot of Michigan fans, Rich, might be surprised. But Army has a winning record against the Wolverines, don't they?
Yes, they do. And it's interesting because, you look back at the history, the games in the 1940s, and, when Army and Michigan were, near the top of the rankings almost every year. It's great to renew these rivalries, and it's been really cool the past few years, Army being able to take on Penn State, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Oklahoma last year, and really renew some of these the great rivalries from years past when Army would take on these teams.
No, absolutely. Well, for Army, head coach Jeff Monken is 35-28 in his tenure at West Point. In the last 3 years, it's been a really good run for Army football, though, hasn't it?
No, it really has. And you look at what he's brought. He's brought an attitude. He's brought a system. He's brought a structure of what it takes to win at a service academy. He had great success working under Paul Johnson at Georgia Southern, at Navy, at Georgia Tech, and really, brought that formula. I think for a long time, Army was searching for really how, to win, how to build a winning program with the, with the challenges you have as a service academy. And I think Paul Johnson, for all the service academies, drew up a great blueprint in his time at Navy, from the system to the players to the scheduling and everything. And I think that Jeff Monken's brought that here to West Point. And, it's interesting. You look at his second year when Army was 2-10, there were 7 games that were one drive was the difference. Army lost by 1 score. And the motto of the 2016 team was 7 drives. And they obviously won, most of the close games in 16, won almost all the close games in 17, and really in 18 won all the close games. I mean, then the Oklahoma game was close, but that was just a game where, I guess you could say obviously that was a close loss, but that was a game where, Army played so well and was right there against the team, which as we know, ended up in the college football playoff. And I think that's the edge. I think, Jeff Monken will say in every weekly news conference, there's not a team that Army's going to go against that has players that Army offered and got, or that offered Army's players on their roster. So Army's always going to have to win games with grit, with determination, with system. And I think it's winning the close games, because a lot of these teams, they're going to be, at near same talent level or have a better talent level than Army. So I think the ability to win the close games, that's literally the difference between 2-10 in 2015 and 11-2 in 2018.
Last year, the team ended up 19th in the AP poll, number 20 in the coaches poll. As you mentioned, 11-2 overall. Bombed Houston, 70-14 in the Armed Forces Bowl. That is one heck of a season.
Yeah, and it really was. It was a dream season. And I think the thing that Jeff Monken has made clear is that's not the pinnacle for this program. As well as Army played, the 11 wins, as you mentioned, the bowl win, 70-14 win over Houston, the beating Air Force and Navy for the second straight year, beating both of them, and playing that great game at Oklahoma, even though Army came up short. That shouldn't be the pinnacle. He doesn't want to look back and say, oh, well, Army, topped out at 11-2. He says there's still room for improvement. I think there's room, to improve the talent level. There's room to, improve the little tweaks and things that are going to make the difference with, maybe beating an Oklahoma or the opening game last year when Army came out and Duke kind of took it to them down in Durham, being able to win a game like that.
Well, clearly Jeff Monken and his staff do a great job coaching these guys, but recruiting always, I'm sure, a challenge for Army, because you're recruiting a very particular kind of student athlete, and Coach Monken and staff have done a really nice job with that.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, and you go back to the 80s, and Air Force really had was the best service academy for a long time in the 80s. Then you go into the and into the 90s as well. And then you go in the 2000s. Army and Navy were good in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. Then really in the 2000s, it was Navy. That was the best service academy. And now, all three are really competitive. And I think it comes down to, a lot of times these three academies, they recruit a lot of the same players. So if you took that group of players who are going to consider going to a service academy, let's say, right? Because a lot of times that's going to be a first question, yes or no, right? Would you consider playing at a service academy? If that first question is yes, that pool of players, you could probably look back to the 80s and 90s and say, well, Air Force was getting most of them. In the 2000s, Navy was getting most of them probably. And now I think it's a good split between the three. I think it's very competitive. The recruiting, don't know a ton about it, but I think that's when you look at where, Jeff Monken would see this program going, it's, getting the majority of those FBS prospects that would consider a service academy. And I think that's where the when he talks about, hey, 11-2 isn't the pinnacle, there's still room for improvement. I think that's the margin. It's of those prospects that you're recruiting that are gonna consider a service academy, being able to, among those three, get the lion's share of them. That's generally going to determine, among Army, Navy, and Air Force, which is going to be the Commander-in-Chief's trophy winner.
Well, let's talk about this year's team, Rich, which started the season with a 14-7 win against Rice on Friday night. No discussion about the offense really can start without talking about Kelvin Hopkins Jr., the outstanding quarterback. For Michigan fans who have not seen him play, tell us what he means to this team.
It really means everything, not only from a talent standpoint, and obviously last year became the first Army player to run and throw for 1,000 yards in a season. I think just his leadership and his decision making. And it's interesting, before last year, he had to win the quarterback job last preseason, because Ahmad Bradshaw, who was the starting quarterback the previous 2 years, who had set several Army records, rushing yards in a season, had really, in a lot of minds, done everything, but he wasn't a great passer. Didn't really pass the ball all that much. And actually, Kelvin in 2017 was the backup who would come in passing situations. And it's interesting, Kelvin Hopkins' first game was in 2017 against Temple. Army was down by a touchdown with just over a minute left in its own territory. So in that scenario, Jeff Monken put in Kelvin Hopkins because Kelvin could throw. He was known as the throwing backup. He drove Army down the field to the game-tying touchdown, went to overtime. Ahmad Bradshaw came back in overtime, obviously, because it was a more even-up scenario. Army ended up winning the game in overtime. So Kelvin went from someone who was kind of thought of as the passing quarterback, not necessarily an option running quarterback, to winning the job last preseason, I should say, and then just showing just a tremendous ability, not only to throw, but to run. And it really came, the culminating performance for Kelvin was really that Armed Forces Bowl. Played 2.5 quarters, had an injury in the third quarter, didn't play the rest of the game, and had 5 touchdowns. And I think when you saw the evolution of someone over the course of a year to go from maybe who was judged as, he's the thrower, he's not really an option guy, to being able to run the option the way he did and manage the offense and have that huge game in the Armed Forces Bowl is pretty special. And Kelvin also, when you say what he means, such an engaging personality, leadership, and just the kind of guy you want to rally around when you talk to him, when you interview him. He's a special guy, and you can see what he's done on off the field for this team.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing him against Don Brown's defense. That's going to be fun Saturday. The offense did lose a lot of firepower, actually, in the last year with graduation. Darnell Woolfolk, Andy Davidson. Now, Connor Slumpka's back. He was injured, I believe, last week. Sandon McCoy's back. Are they the two guys that will get the bulk of the carries in the backfield?
Yeah, Slumpka and McCoy, they're going to be in new roles, you would say, this year. But, yes, they'll get the bulk of the carries at fullback. Connor Slumpka last year was really the short yardage guy. He was the 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 guy that would come in and get that couple of yards. Sandon McCoy, who was young last year as a sophomore, he was really used as a blocker a lot of the times he was in there. So for both of them, it's a new role. It's Slumpka coming from being a short yardage guy to being now an every down fullback, and Sandon McCoy needing to get used to carrying the ball instead of being in there as a blocker. So it's interesting, new role for both. And I think the other thing is both of them are going to have a higher percentage of fullback carries than last year because you had such depth at fullback. Like you mentioned, having someone like Darnell Woolfolk, Andy Davidson, Kerwin Hull, who was a swing guy, he played some fullback and some slotback. Losing those 3 guys out of a 5-deep fullback rotation, and now you're left with 2, Slumpka and McCoy. Now, we saw Cade Barnard, especially with Slumpka being hurt in the Rice game, also saw Rashad Bolton. So there's some other depth there, but young depth. But you went last year from similar definite, and then when McCoy was young, really working his way in the rotation, and you got to the end of the year with any one of 5 guys could come out with the offense. Then it wasn't a matter of someone being benched or not. It was just their rotation, what the situation was. I mean, there was confidence in all 5 of those guys at the end of the year. So it's definitely different because I think it was a tremendous luxury last year to, if you didn't have to tax those fullbacks with a huge amount of carries in a game. So I don't think this offense is going to change. I don't think there's going to be a significant amount of less carries going to the fullback, but that's something that's going to have to be considered. Not as much how many carries McCoy and Slumpka are getting, but how quickly the 3, 4, and 5, I don't know if they'll go 5, but the 3 and 4 fullbacks can get integrated into the rotation and be able to take some of those carries.
With us on our Visitors Edition this week is Army Radio play-by-play voice Rich DeMarco. Rich, let's move it over and talk about the other side of ball, the Army defense, which was statistically one of the very best in college football last year, but they also lost heavily to graduation and lost defensive coordinator Jay Bateman to North Carolina. It's a big transition year for the D, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's a reloading situation. And I think when Jeff Monk will say, hey, you know what, graduating players, that's just part of college football. Mm-hmm. You have good teams, they have good players, those players graduate, and, it's up to the coaches, it's up to the staff to recruit players that are as good or better than them. So I think we've seen that the past couple of years, especially in the linebacking unit you had a couple of years ago. Andrew King and Jeremy Kempf, I think a lot of people thought, oh my gosh, how are you going to replace him? And James Nautigal comes in last year. He was terrific along with Cole Christensen. Cole is back, now just cycling in some more linebackers. I think that's something where you're going to see as the year goes on the depth of this defense and the way they've been able to bring guys like Jeremiah Lowry, who had a huge game in the opening game. We saw him a lot toward the end of last year. The secondary is an interesting unit because that unit has really been more experienced beyond its years over the past few years. There have been so many injuries, players leaving the program that unit in particular has had to have young guys step up. And I think now you have such experienced guys in Jalen McClinton and Elijah Riley, both those guys. Elijah Riley had a terrific game against Rice. Jalen McClinton had the game-winning, game-saving pass breakup late in the fourth quarter. Defensive line, some new faces there. Rod Stoddard and Kwabena Bonsu, they both played well on Friday night against Rice. And then one other linebacker I should mention, who's also on the line. He'll be a rusher. Kind of as a fourth defensive line, who's kind of an outside linebacker, Amadeo West, who's come back from a ton of injuries, an ACL, a torn Achilles, and he had as good a training camp as anyone, and he played well against Rice. And you mentioned defensive coordinator Jay Bateman moving on to the University of North Carolina. He was replaced by the safeties coach, John Luce, who was for more than a decade a defensive coordinator at Lafayette in the Patriot League. He was also part of the Army staff in the 1990s, especially the year 1996 where Army defeated Navy and Air Force, won the Commander-in-Chief's trophy, which was Army's last Commander-in-Chief's trophy before 2017. So John Luce has been with the program in this stint since Jeff Monken took over as head coach. So it was pretty seamless. Jay Bateman was known for pressure and bringing people, blitzing, and John Luce is much the same. So I think the hope there is that you don't see any drop-off, any transition, because the philosophy of the defense is going to stay the same. But I'd say from a personnel standpoint, the defensive line probably has the most new players. Amadeo West, Jeremiah Lowry, they're helping out, filling the roles in the linebacking core. And then the secondary, and we'll see, they'll be tested, I know, on Saturday at Michigan Stadium. The secondary is really the veteran strong part of this defense.
Well, last week Army opened with a 14-7 win over Rice, a very hard-fought game. Talk about that win and some of the positives you took away from that game.
Well, you look at the end of the day, the defense gave up 7 points. So when the defense gives up 7 points, you would think you're going to win the game and maybe win it fairly easily. Army's offense, though, just never. I think it's more of, I was going to say never got in sync, but I think it was more the way the Rice defense played. Rice had a lot of young guys, one senior on their defensive TV. They played well. Army was, in the first half having a tough time getting a push from the offensive line to really get that running game churning and going. Army, ironically, in the first quarter, went for a 4th down at its own 15-yard line and didn't get it. And unfortunately, the defense held Rice to a field goal attempt, which they missed. So it was a net no points lost there. But Army's 2 scoring drives went 95 and 96 yards. So when Army needed to, they were able to really drive the ball down, especially in the fourth quarter. It's like as we talk about, pounding the rock. It's not going to be the first couple times you hit it, but it's going to break. But then at some point, after you're doing it a while, you'll start getting some openings. And that's what we saw really in the fourth quarter on that touchdown drive. Army was also really beleaguered with tough field position the whole game. Started to drive at its 4-yard line, its 6-yard line, its 5-yard line, its 18-yard line. So Army's average starting position was well inside their 20-yard line. Rice's average starting position was out near their 35. So you couple all that together, and it also being the first game. And hey, as I like to say, a win is a win. After that bowl game against Houston, I remember we were talking as a radio crew in the booth, and I said, it doesn't matter if it's 56 points or 2 points. A win is a win. And I think you could use the reverse of that after the Rice game. Heck, a 7-point win, but you know what? Game 1, got out of there with a victory. Let's move on to Michigan.
Well, Rich, Don Brown started talking about defending the Army attack back in spring practice, then into the summer. And I know some fans, Michigan fans, might be saying, why is he so worried about it? But, this Army triple option offense is an absolute nightmare because you just don't see it enough.
Oh, Don Brown, and I've followed Don Brown for a long time, the accomplished head coach, what he did up at UMass. And he's been around this offense, and he's been in enough places where I don't think he's going to be surprised by what Army brings to the table. But you bring up a good point of the preparation, and I think there's a big difference between having a coach who knows it, who is going to be able to attack it, and then teaching that to the players. And I think, as you would know from covering Michigan, as I've known for 15, 20 years, Don Brown is one of the best defensive coaches around. So I don't think Army's going to come up and surprise anyone. And I think for Don Brown, it just shows, and probably from his experience, how I read that, what you just said about spending all that time preparing, it's also Don Brown making it clear how much work needs to be done to defend this correctly. And, if you work at something long enough, you're going to be able to be successful against it. And how I read that is he's saying to himself, hey, if we're going to do well against this offense, we need to put in the time to prepare and do it. And not surprisingly, setting the tone like that, talking about how much time he spent looking at Army.
Well, if you watch college football from coast to coast now, the defenses are very active. They're coming, they're blitzing. It's just hyper. And you cannot play hyper against this offense. You've got to play assignment football.
Yeah, and it's funny. And it's funny you say that because really, and you hit it on the head. It's how defenses are taught today. Is hey, this is what you have to do every play, every game.
Yeah.
For this one game, you've got to do the complete opposite.
Yeah.
And not anticipate and stay where you are. And it's I'll tell you, that's what makes college football so great. And when you look at the matchups and whether you want to say, Army's a 20-plus point underdog on Saturday. I think what makes college football awesome is those games within the game and the offensive styles and how you defend it, and that, hey, Army could come into, Norman, Oklahoma, and take Oklahoma to overtime, and Army can go to Michigan and have, a lot of the nation really focused in on this game and a curiosity of, hey, well, what's going to happen now when Army faces Michigan? And that's the beauty of college football. Of course, that's why they, lace them up and get on the field on Saturdays. But that's just one of the many things that make, I think, college football the greatest sport in the world.
No, I agree with you 100%. And I think it's a lot of fun. In my lifetime, I've seen the Air Force Academy come into the Big House a couple of times, even the Naval Academy. I think just once in 1976, the Navy came in. And, of course, as I mentioned at the top, I was around in 62 when we played Army, but had no memory of that game, so it's going to be a lot of fun. The weather's supposed to be great, so looking forward to it. Our guest today on our Visitors Edition has been Army Radio play-by-play voice Rich DeMarco. Rich, thank you so much for your time, and enjoy your day at the Big House.
No, I really appreciate it, and anytime, and thanks for having me on, and best of luck after Saturday, the rest of the year.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. On Quick Hits today, Michael Dwumfor and Donovan Jeter will play Saturday. According to defensive line coach John Nua, there was no word on whether John Runyon Jr. would be ready to go, and no other injury updates. Here are some game day facts. This will be the 10th game between Michigan and Army. They lead the series 5-4. The first meeting was on October 13, 1945 in New York. Army won 28-7. The last meeting was way back in 1962 here in Ann Arbor, a 17-7 Michigan victory. Army is coached by Jeff Monken, who is now in his 6th year at West Point. His record is 35-28. Last year was a great season for Army. They were 11-2 and finished the season ranked number 19 in the AP poll, number 20 in the coaches poll. They destroyed Houston 70-14 in the Armed Forces Bowl last year, and they returned 5 starters on offense, 4 on defense. As it stands now, we are in for another great weather day on Saturday. The weatherman says partly cloudy and mid-70s. It could be breezy, but it's going to be dry. So let's hope that forecast holds up. Dorian could impact even our weather up here this weekend. Thanks again to Army radio voice Rich DeMarco for being our guest today. I still find it hard to believe we have 2 byes this year, and the first one is next week. So we'll have just one show for you. Make sure you join me on our Michigan Game Day show Wednesday as we recap the Army game and see how we feel about this team after just 2 short weeks. That will do it for this week. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Think victory, everyone. Beat Army. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!